We are running. Okay, today we're going to begin a new chapter for this coming section, and we're going to understand on this chapter today the components of the aggregate demand. It was the total demand that takes place in the economy. Who are the main players in the economy? What happens when the aggregate demand changes? And then we're going to break the components. We're going to look at the consumption, the investments, the government purchases, and the exports, and see how they behave and what is the impact they have in the economy, okay? So let's go ahead and open the slides, okay? So at this point, this is what we have. Okay. Okay. Okay, we're going to try to understand exactly what is the components of the aggregate demand and exactly what has happened in the US economy since the great recessions. As you already know, the economy has actually moved through cycles, and these cycles have actually impacted the lives of many individuals. And in many cases, the reason why this has happened is simply because individuals, either they are afraid of what's happening in the economy and they have stopped actually consuming. So today, let's go ahead and explain how this actually works. So I think I can probably explain it in a different way. Let me see if I can do this screen share. And I'm gonna go this way. Okay. As you already know, the aggregate demand is the total consumption that takes place in the economy. Who buys in the economy? Okay, the consumption is made by, the aggregate demand is made by consumptions, by investments, by government purchases, and by exports minus imports. The aggregate supply is the total supply that takes place in the economy. So where supply and demand intersects, that's the equilibrium. Okay, as you already know, this is price, and this is quantity or GDP or output. So now look what happened, for example, if for some reason individuals become afraid of the future, like what is happening today. If consumption decreases, the aggregate demand is going to move to the left. And if aggregate demand moves to the left, as you can see now, we arrive at a new equilibrium. Let's assume that before the economy was producing, let's say, $600 billion of output. And now because the aggregate demand changes because consumers decide to buy less, or companies decide to postpone their investments, or the government decide not to buy, many reasons can make this to happen. So as you can see, now we move into a new equilibrium, and now the equilibrium is at 500. So in other words, we are producing less than what we were producing before. So now let's assume that 600 is the place in which we have full employment. Now the economy is at full employment at 600. So if we are producing now at 500, then as you can see, because we are producing at 500, then we are producing less than before. So we have high levels of unemployment. Prices have decreased, but we have people out of work. So then what can we do to be able to go back to equilibrium? How can we go back? Well, the only thing we have to do is try to stimulate the economy so the economy will move back and the aggregate demand will shift to the right. So today in this lecture, we're going to try to specifically discuss consumptions and investments and all these components on an individual basis. So let's talk about, for example, when the aggregate demand is in equilibrium. If the aggregate demand is in equilibrium, it simply means that the total supply and the total demand, they are equal. Everything being produced is being consumed, right? That's equilibrium. Now the question is, what is the reality or the possibilities that everything we make is actually being consumed? For example, if companies are producing $600 million worth of products, this is the aggregate supply that individuals are going to consume exactly the same amount of products, 600. And as you can see, that usually doesn't happen, because in many cases, the companies, let's say, produce 600, with consumers only, let's say, consuming, let's say, 590. So as you can see, we are consuming $10 billion less than what we are producing. So that means that the companies are getting stock with inventories of $10 billion because consumers are only buying, 590. Okay, so let's talk about consumption. Let's break the components of aggregate demand. Let's begin with number one, consumption. Now, as you already know, we go out and work and we get paid. right? And then with the money that we earn, there's only two things we can do. We either going to consume it or we can save it. I'm talking about your disposable income, the income that is left after your taxes. So as you can see, you go out and work and you get paid money, right? And then for that money, they're going to subtract your taxes and then they give you your paycheck. Well, your paycheck is your disposable income. It's the income that you have at your disposal that you can do only two things. You can consume or you can save, right? So if you decide to consume only $80 out of $100 you earned this week, that means that you're actually saving $20. Now, when we think about savings for most of us, specifically business students, we think about savings as you go into the bank and open a savings account. In economics, that's not what saving is. Well, that's part of what saving is, but that's not the way we define savings. To us, savings is any part of income that is not consumed. So if you're not consuming, then you're saving. Let me give you an example. Let's assume that one of you decide to, after this coronavirus is good, you decide to take a small vacation and go to the Bahamas. And you go to the bank and you borrow $1,500, or you simply charge $1,500 on your credit card. Okay, you charge $1,500 for the plane tickets to go to the Bahamas. So now it's going to be easy for you because you're going to pay $100 a month for the next 15 months. You decide to pay that in monthly payments. Okay, so you go out and work and you get paid $600, right? And then you consume $400, right? Well, better. Let's just go this way. You borrow $1,500 and you're gonna pay a monthly payment of $100. The following week, you send a payment to your MasterCard for $100. Okay, that $100 that you send in a payment to your MasterCard, is that consumption or that is savings? What do you think? See, consumption is the part of income that you use for consume. Saving is the part of income that is used not in consumption. So when you send a payment of $100 to your MasterCard, are you consuming or are you saving?
Consuming.
What are you consuming, sir?
It's like delayed consumption. You already consumed.
No, think about it. The consumption already took place. See, you went to Hawaii or the Bahamas 2 weeks ago. You consumed that 2 weeks ago. Now you're sending a payment.
Wouldn't it be like AR, like accounts receivables, where like it's sort of a delayed or deferred payment, where like it's counting towards consumption?
You say it's actually towards consumption? Well, in economics, we classify that as savings, because savings is any part of income that is not consumed. And you say, well, that doesn't make any sense. How am I going to save? Well, think about it. It actually makes a lot of sense from an economic point of view. Look at this. If I borrow $1,500 to go to the Bahamas, I have $1,500 in liabilities at this point, right? You have a liability of $100. You send a payment of $100, okay? So what happened to your liabilities? Your liabilities have decreased now to $1,400. So in reality, you're actually increasing to your net worth. So you're actually saving. See? So, I mean, that's just a simple things in economics that we need to understand, that individuals consume or they save. That's the only option. Now, how do we make consumption? Well, we make consumption according to my desire. Some people have a desire to consume everything they make, and some people like to save. So then for every dollar we receive, people consume according to their marginal propensity to consume, and they save according to the marginal propensity to save. In other words, we have a desire to consume and a desire to save. For example, for some people like us, we have limited budgets. Chances are that we're spending everything that we make. I mean, it is possible. It is possible that my MPC can be greater than 1. Now, how can that be possible? Because 1 is equal to MPC plus MPS. So I'm telling you that MPC can be greater than 1. So in other words, it's possible that I'm consuming, let's say, 120. See, my income is only 1, I'm consuming 120, that is possible probably because I'm de-saving, or I'm de-saving $20, which simply means I'm borrowing, right? So then as you can see, then consumption to a certain extent is a function of your disposable income, which simply means as your income goes up, your consumption actually goes up, right? So consumption is a function of your income, which simply means that the more you make, chances are the more you're going to consume. However, we need to understand that, again, individuals are going to consume according to the propensity to consume, and they're going to save according to the propensity to save. So 1 is always equal to MPC plus MPS. So if I am saving 80 cents, let's say I'm saving 80 cents will be 1 minus 0.80 equals to 0.20, which means that my consumption is what? Is 20. Again, if my MPS is 0.8, then my MPC has to be 0.20, right? So if we were to create a graph in which I consume everything that I make, let's assume this is my consumption and this is my income, which simply means that if I make $100, I'm going to consume $100. And if I make $200, I'm going to consume $200. So as you can see, if I consume everything that I make and I put that on a graph, my consumption curve will be a perfect 45-degree angle. See, my consumption and my income are always going to be the same, right? If I consume everything that I make. So then that means that when I make $100, I'll be consuming $100. But if I'm making $0, then I'll be what? I'll be consuming $0. The question is it possible for individuals to have zero consumption? And the answer is no. It's not possible that you can have a zero consumption because you need to consume something just to stay alive. So there's some consumption that takes place in the economy that has no relationship with income. And we call that autonomous consumption. So autonomous consumption is the consumption that has no relationship with income. So then look at this. This graph, this 45-degree angle line, will represent a situation in which I'm consuming everything that I make. Again, consumption and income. But in real life, consumption never begins at zero. Consumption begins someplace here, right? And it goes like that, which simply means that right here, there's some type of autonomous consumption, that consumption that has no relationship with your income. Okay, now look at this. Let's say here at 200. 200. And my consumption is, again, this is my actual consumption. The black line is my income. See, as you can see, look at this. At an income of 200, I'm actually consuming 300. At an income of 400, right here, I'm actually consuming a little bit more than 400. Let's say I'm consuming 425. And only right here, only at an income of, let's say 600, my consumption and my income are the same, which simply means this is a graph that is called the income consumption graph that simply illustrates what happened in the economy. And this is what it actually telling you guys. What it's telling you is that at low levels of income, individuals tend to consume more than what they make, right? At low levels of income, consumption tend to be higher than income. That's what it's telling you. See, people in low incomes tend to consume more than what they make. They borrow, they use the credit cards, they go to the pawn shop and they do something to be able to stay alive. But at high levels of income, individuals actually now they're able to save part of their income because they're making more than what they need. So in a situation like this, which right here is my, let's say this is my line, see my income is actually higher than my consumption. So then we simply telling you that individuals in high levels of income tend to save part of their income. And the reason is because they have more than what they need, right? So then what have we learned up to this point? What we have learned is this, that consumption is a function of income, right? That there are two different types of consumption. So then my total consumption is equal to my consumption that is affected by my disposable income and also my autonomous consumption. So then my total consumption is equal to my consumption that is dependent on my income plus the autonomous consumption. And the best example to illustrate that is this way. Think about some of you. How many of you are not working? How many of you are not working? All of you are not working. So how much is your income? 0. But I don't see none of you that they are suffering from malnutrition. So how is it that you're able to survive? Because you have a consumption that is not what? Depending on your income. At this point, you have a consumption that depends on someone else's income. Does that make sense? Your parents, your grandparents, somebody. Or it's possible that at this point, even if you have no income, you still can consume as a result of being involved in the saving, which simply either you're taking money from your what? From your savings accounts, or you're simply borrowing money. Okay? So again, we're talking about the components of consumption. So consumption is a function of disposable income. Individuals consume according to their MPC, that's the marginal propensity to consume, and they save according to their marginal propensity to save, right? So then the marginal is the additional, which simply means this. Look at what I'm trying to tell you. Let me go right here. Okay. Let's assume that this is me. Let me come back. Let's assume that this is me. Let's say I have an income, or let's say I have a weekly income, let's say of $1,000. At this point, because let's say I'm actually spending $980 of all my income. So that means that I'm actually only saving $20 a week, $20 a week of my weekly income, or my monthly income. Okay, so this is me. I'm spending $980 out of my monthly income, and I'm only saving $20 of my monthly income. Now, if the government send me a stimulus check of $1,200, chances are that this additional check that came this month, I'm gonna treat it different than my regular income. It's possible for some people to say, oh, now I was not counting with this money. I'm gonna go ahead and buy me a high definition TV, and I'm gonna spend all the $1,200. So the individual would spend $200. So at that point, the marginal propensity to consume for this new additional income is 1. So in other words, they're consuming 100%. Right? Or it's possible that individuals say, something, I was not counting with this check. I'm going to save this check. I'm going to save it all. So then the MPC is 0 and the MPS is 1. In other words, the consumption, the marginal propensity to consume becomes 0, and the marginal propensity to save becomes 1. So in other words, the additional money that comes into our hands, we tend to treat it different than our regular income. That's something that you need to understand. Okay, so now look at this. Let's assume that this is me, right? This is what I'm doing. Now I receive a check for $1,000, and I decide to spend all of that. Okay, I decide to spend all of that. So how much money have I spent this week? Well, this week I have spent $1,980, right? The $1,000 that came to me, I spent it plus the $980 that was already spending. So I spent $1,980 on an income of $2,000. So then how much is my average propensity to consume? So it'll be what? $1,980 divided by 2,000. Somebody give me a number. 1980 divided by 2,000. Somebody has a calculator?
What is the 1980 from? Is that just?
I was spending 980 before. This is my typical monthly expenditures. I spend 980 and I save 20 out of every $1,000 that I earn. But my grandma sent me a check for $1,000, and I decide to go ahead and spend it all. I decide not to spend on that. So then this month I have spent 1980, right? So my income for that month was 2,000, the one that I earned and the one that was given to me. So how much was my average propensity to consume this year or this month? It would be 1990 divided by 2,000 will be what?
That's 0.99.
9 what, sir?
99.
Okay, so as you can see, my average propensity to consume at this point is 99%, which means that on the average, I consume 99% of everything that I earn. So if my average propensity to consume is 99, then my average propensity to save must be what? 0.10. That on the average, this month, I only save 10% of my income. Okay? Any questions or any comments? So then, during the Great Recession, spending decreased across the board. There was a lot of layoffs because the aggregate demand declined. So in this chapter, we're going to specifically try to understand the components, how they work, and what happened to the economy. So then, I already told you this. In the macro models, macro equilibrium occurs where aggregate demand equals aggregate supply. So we have macro equilibrium, everything that we make is actually being consumed, right? And it will be, let's assume right here. Look at a solid line. The economy was in equilibrium at ADs of 2. We are at full employment. Ignore the arrows, ignore the arrows. But for some reason, the aggregate demand shift. Boom. So as you can see now, we have a new equilibrium, E's of 1. So as you can see, this equilibrium that we're experiencing today is less than where we're supposed to be. This is where the full employment is supposed to be. So then the only way we can reach this new equilibrium is if we do something to stimulate the aggregate demand to go up. And think about, for example, this relief package that we have been created. The relief package have been created in order to stimulate consumption. So consumption will go to the right. We are giving money to companies so they can probably invest or retain their employees. So the aggregate demand will go to the right. We are trying to create some government projects. So the aggregate demand will go to the right to try to move us towards the equilibrium, right? So again, we're trying to understand how can the government manipulate these components. So what is the components of the aggregate demand? Well, we have consumption, right? Investments, government purchases, and net exports. So let's continue with consumption. What do we know about consumption? Well, consumption is the amount of money that you spend on final goods and services. So I already told you this, your disposable income is equals to your consumption plus your saving. That's all you can do with your disposable income. You either consume it or you save it. And consumption in the economy accounts for 2/3 of total spending. So there was 66% of all economic activity. 66% of all economic activity in the United States is as a result of individuals buying items, right? Consumers tend to spend most of what they earn, right? I mean, in the United States, our marginal propensity to save is very small, which simply means that we have a very high marginal propensity to consume, that we consume most of what we make, right? So on the average, again, what is the average? It's the total consumption divided by your total income. On the average, Americans spend about 95.1 out of every dollar they receive, which means that on the average, Americans only save 5 cents out of every dollar. We have a very high average propensity to consume, right? And the reason is because our economy is based on that ideology of materialistic things. Let's have things, let's have it now, let's buy it now, let's buy it now, let's buy it now. And people buy. And as a result of this, the economy has always been able to grow by 3% every year. When look what's happening today. What is happening today is that most people are afraid of what's going to happen tomorrow, and people are postponing their consumptions, right? And because people are postponing their consumptions because they see the future a little bit bleak, they don't know what's going to happen, then the consumption is coming down and is creating high levels of unemployment, okay? So again, people consume according to their marginal propensity to consume. And marginal propensity to consume is the change in consumption divided by your change in income. See, and the example that I just gave you, before I was spending $9.80 out of every check that I was receiving. And then boom, I receive a check of $1,000 and I decide to treat that $1,000 on a different way. So my consumption increased by $1,000, when my disposable income increased by $1,000, so 1,000 divided by 1,000 equals to 1,000. So then my marginal propensity to consume for this additional dollar became 1. Right? And again, you need to understand that there's a difference between your average and your marginal. Your marginal is the change or the response, to a new dollar that you earn. Okay? So then MPS, your marginal propensity to save, is equals to 1 minus your marginal propensity to consume, which simply means this, that if you're saving 20 cents, then that means that you're consuming 80 cents. Yeah, very simple explanations. So if we add my total consumption and my total savings, this is a typo, MPC plus MPS is always going to be equals to 1, right? MPC plus MPS, again, this is a typo right here, is equals to 1. And I already told you that consumption, or there are two things that impact consumption, is the consumption that is income dependent, and then just autonomous consumption. What is autonomous consumption? Is the consumption that is not dependent on your current income, which simply means that we know that people consume even if they have no income. Think of this. What are the sources of income? Where's the sources where we can get money? You work, right? You borrow, you beg, or you steal. Those are the sources of income. Working, borrowing, begging, or stealing. So in your case, I already know that you're not working, right? So if you're not working, where's your consumption coming from? Are you borrowing? Are you begging? Or are you stealing? Melody, a little bit of everything? Huh?
Well, I actually am working right now, but I still don't pay for my own food, so I guess I'm stealing.
So what did that came from? Begging?
No. Maybe, I don't know, maybe stealing. I don't steal from my parents, but maybe that. I don't know what that falls under. So,
do your parents have an obligation to feed you?
At this point, no, because
No.
I'm an adult.
Legally, they can tell you, hey, I need you to move out of the house. You're 18. I know, Gita, you don't like that, but legally, your parents can tell you that. Does it make sense? So then everything we're getting from our parents is nothing more than what? Baking. Right? And your parents, they do it out of love and out of social pressure that they have. They have to look like good parents, so they have to feed you. It's a joke, guys. It's a joke. But, in every joke, there's a little bit of truth. Right? So, again, we're talking about consumption. So consumption comes as a result of two things. As a result of my income, what's a result of another consumption that has no relationship with my income, and that's autonomous consumption. Okay? So consumption can also be affected by a couple of factors. For example, consumption can be affected by my change in income. If I lose my job, my consumption is going to decrease. If you expect greater wealth or a decrease in your wealth, that's going to affect your consumption. I think in one of the presentations, we're talking about what happened with the housing industry. And they say about 80% of individuals are not buying houses because they're uncertain about the future. Right? And then in the same, and I think it was just a couple of minutes ago on the presentation, and they also say that 20% of the individuals are actually buying houses now because interest rates have actually decreased. So as you can see, then consumption can also be affected by the availability of credit. The consumption can also be affected by changes in rebates. Okay, so there's a lot of things that can change my consumption. So again, there are two types of consumption: a consumption that is dependent on my income, right, and my consumption that is dependent just simply on my autonomous consumption. So remember this: consumption is always equal to your autonomous consumption plus your consumption that is dependent on your disposable income. Right? Again, just a little, I guess, formula to explain the situation. Okay. So we discussed this. We discuss this. So on this one, I already told you, for example, look at the green line. This is a green line that represents my consumption and my income, if they are the same. So for example, if I make $100, if I consume $100, the point will be G. If I make 200 and I consume 200, it will be C. And as you can see, the green line is I'm consuming everything that I make. So if I make 0, I'll be consuming 0, but I already told you that that cannot be possible. We still have to consume something, right? So then we have an autonomous consumption. So on this graph, the autonomous consumption is $50. And as you can see, all the way to an income of 200, these individuals were actually consuming more than what they make. So they were de-saving. See, at low levels of income, we tend to de-save. Then at high levels of income, we tend to save. And again, very simple, you already know that. Okay, so let's continue with this. Things that can change my consumption, right? Again, you already told you, income, expectations, wealth, credit conditions, tax policies. So we already learned everything about consumption. Now let's talk about investments. Investments is consumption made by companies, right? So investment is expenditures on either a company buying a new plant or a company buying inventories. So this is what we have. This is what we have, guys. We have the aggregate demand, the aggregate supply, and this is C plus I plus G plus X minus M. We already know about consumption, right? Now let's talk about investments. Investments is purchases made by companies. Where do companies do investments? Companies do fixed investments. In other words, they buy a new machine or a new plant, or they do inventory investments. And inventory investments is when a company buys raw materials, right? So when a company buys raw materials, the aggregate demand moves to the right as a result of the investments that companies are making. So then investment is a function of what? In other words, we already know that consumption is a function of disposable income, right? So what is investment a function of? What do you think? Investment is a function of what? Well, we used to believe, we still believe that investments by companies is a function of interest rates. This is investments and this is interest rates. When interest rates are high, companies borrow, let's say, $100 million, but if interest rates drop, companies tend to borrow more. So then what this graph is simply telling you is that interest rates have a big impact on investments. They have a big impact on investments. However, now we have come to a realization that investments is not only a function of interest rates. So again, investments, we used to believe that it was a function of interest rates. Investment, a function of interest rates. But now we believe that investments is a function of animal spirits. And by animal spirits, we mean how companies feel. If companies feel very optimistic about the future, they go borrow money. But if companies feel very pessimistic about the future, they are not going to expand. They are not going to hire new people. They are not going to buy raw material. They are not going to produce more. They are not going to increase inventories. So then investments is a function of animal spirits. And think about what is happening today in our economy. What are companies doing? Are companies expanding? Are companies increasing production? And the answer is no, 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 no. And the reason is because companies, they see the future very, very black. They don't see a lot of future. Think about the airline companies. Which airline company in their mind is going to buy a new plane? Which company is going to ramp up production when nobody's buying the products? Okay. So again, we're trying to understand the components of the aggregate demand and then investments. So again, there are two types of investments that companies make. They make fixed investments and inventory investments. Fixed investments is purchase of new buildings, and inventory investments is the purchase of raw materials. So then investment spending is related to interest rates, inversely related. When interest rates go up, investments come down. And when interest rates come down, investment goes up. But we also need to know that investment is also a function of how people feel, okay? And again, the expectations. So think about this. Think about this broken blue line. At an interest rate of 6, companies will be borrowing $300 billion. But if interest rates increase to 8, then companies are only going to invest $150 billion, or they're going to borrow $150 billion. Think about this. What is the price of money? Well, the price of money is interest rates. What happened to the demand for pizza if the price of pizza goes up? Nothing happened to demand for pizza, only to the quantity demanded. So then the demand for money is not demanded by interest rates, but the quantities of monies. And then other factors can shift my demand. For example, if companies have better expectations about the future, they just borrow more money. They don't take into consideration interest rates. And if companies feel worse expectations for the near future, they're not going to borrow money, so then investment shift to the left. Okay, so we discussed that. So now the next one is, how about government purchases? Government purchase is a function of what? Okay, I already told you, consumption, a function of interest rates, investments, a function, consumption, a function of disposable income, right? Investments, a function of interest rates. How about government purchases? In other words, government purchase is affected by what? Anybody?
That be related to like the general state of the economy?
So that means that when the economy is doing good, government buys more?
What? I'm sorry.
So does that mean that when the economy is doing good, the government buys more? They do more government purchases?
No, I should say, actually, maybe it's inflation. I don't know if that's right. But when the economy is doing poorly, the government spends more.
Okay, when the government, so then you say government spending is a function of economic situations? When the economy is doing bad, government buys more. When the economy is doing good, government buys less? Well, I mean, to a certain extent, you are right. But the answer is this. Government is a function of, or government purchase is a function of the administration. And the administration is whoever is in power. Whoever is in power. Regardless of how the economy is doing, whoever is in power, they're going to determine if they're going to what? If they're going to expand or not to expand. Think about this. In the past, we used to blame, or we used to say that the Democrats, they were the spenders, and that we need to put a Republican that would be in charge of the economy to control the amount of national debt. Well, as you can see, in these past 4 years, we have spent more under a Republican administration than a Democrat administration. And you say, yeah, Mr. House, but that's because of the coronavirus. No. Because the coronavirus only took place 3 months. And the administration, present administration now, has been in power for almost 4 years. So in the first year of the Trump administration and the second year, we decided to spend humongous amount of money at a tune of about $1 trillion more than what we were earning in revenue. Why? Well, because the administration. So then government purchase is a function of the administration, whoever is in power, okay? So again, the idea is that every time the government intervenes in the economy is because they want to stabilize the economy. Now, but we already know that federal spending creates national debt, right? But again, remember what we have learned about classical economics, okay? Keynesian economics that simply say that who cares? Who cares if we are borrowing money as long as the economy is expanding? And the last component of the aggregate demand is net exports. And net exports is the amount of, the net situation of imports versus exports. And this is a function of many, many reasons. Net export can be affected by our prices, which means inflation. It can also be affected by the prices of other nations, inflation in another nation. It can also be affected by the recession in our nation or the recessions in another nation. See, for example, in today's presentation, they discussed that Germany and Japan and China's net levels of exports have decreased dramatically. Why? Why? And the reason is because other countries are not what? Other countries are not buying, right? Because other countries are not buying, okay? So again, what we're trying to understand is how the aggregate demand can be affected as a result of changes. And it can create macro stabilities, it can create macro failures. Look, we only have about 3 more slides. So let me go ahead and finish this. Look at this situation right here, okay? Are you seeing my PowerPoint slides? Yes? Okay, let me go to the previous. Okay, look in graph 1, graph A. Aggregate demand and aggregate supply intersects at point E, which means that we are at full employment. The economy is perfect, everything we produce is being consumed. Look at graph B. The aggregate demand shifts to the left. So now we are E2, which simply means that we are below full employment. So we have a recessionary gap. The economy is in a recession. We are consuming less than what we are capable of producing. But look what happened in graph C. In graph C, the demand went to the right. And now what will happen is that we are producing at a level that is higher than full. In other words, we are probably buying the inventories, right? And as a result of this, then prices are going up. So on the next 3 chapters, guys, we're going to learn how can the government intervene to change the aggregate demand to the right? Or how can the government intervene to change the aggregate demand to the left? And remember, there are 2 ways in which the government intervenes in the economy. One is by fiscal policy, which simply means changing the level of taxes and the level of money in the economy. And the other one is by monetary policy, which is changing the level of interest rates. And those are the things that we're going to learn, how Congress changes taxes and transfer payments to stimulate the economy or to stop the economy, and how the Federal Reserve Bank changes the amount of money in the economy, again, to try to achieve the same objectives. So now we're going to learn a little bit of mathematical formulas to figure out exactly how much money I need to spend to be able to reach the point that I want to go, okay? And this is the end of the chapter, guys. It's 12 o'clock. Technically, you still have 30 minutes of class. This is the amount of time that I'm going to give you so you can think about, you know, what are you going to do about a topic that you want to discuss, okay? So have a wonderful day, guys. I'll see you tomorrow. And be sure you give me a topic tomorrow. I'll approve it. And one more time, guys, great job. Everything's going good. Love you.